The wind on New Aurelia 4 wasn't wind at all, it was the bitter taste of ozone, mixed with the acrid tang of burned metal and scorched earth. The remnants of what had once been a bustling settlement lay twisted and shattered beneath a pall of smoke, its buildings reduced to jagged silhouettes that groaned in the gusts. Captain Marcus Harlow crouched behind the fractured remains of a landing pad control tower, his rifle resting lightly against his shoulder, eyes narrowed against the haze. Every instinct screamed at him that this wasn't a standard raid, that the reports from the outer colonies had been only half the truth. Around him, his unit of hardened soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, though their faces betrayed the unspoken fear creeping in. They were veterans of the frontier wars, men and women who had stared death in the eye more times than they cared to count, but nothing had prepared them for this. The Deathworlders were no ordinary enemy, no predictable opponent to be outflanked or overpowered. They were legends whispered across the sectors, humans who thrived where others perished, whose unpredictability was as lethal as any weapon. Movement, Lieutenant Sarah Keaton's voice cut through the chaos, calm and precise. She pointed toward a flicker across the jagged ridgeline, and Marcus's gut clenched. There it was, the first sign of the humans. Not in formation, not making a show of strength, but moving with a predator's silence, every step deliberate. Marcus's mind raced. The stories had been warnings, tales traded like ghost stories in the cantinas of neutral worlds. Humans, it was said, could turn desperation into strategy, weakness into a weapon. But seeing them firsthand, watching them advance across New Aurelia Ivy's shattered plains, made legend real. It made terror tangible. A sudden blast rocked the ground beneath them, throwing clouds of dust and shards of concrete into the air. The alien defenders cried out, scrambling for cover, but the humans didn't pause. They advanced through the storm of debris as if the explosion had never occurred. Their armor reflected the dim, fractured sunlight in strange, shifting patterns, and their weapons discharged in controlled bursts, cutting arcs of luminous death across the battlefield. Marcus signaled for a tactical retreat, but the terrain betrayed them. The ridges funneled their escape, and the humans seemed to anticipate every move, cutting off pathways with surgical precision. He could feel the weight of their intent, the unspoken lesson that this wasn't merely a raid, it was a calculated obliteration. Hours bled into one another. Entire battalions of HRAC infantry, Trel K mech units, and Giovanni strike teams were systematically neutralized. Reports pinged in from adjacent sectors, isolated worlds reduced to rubble, communication arrays sliced apart, supply lines disintegrating under a human assault that seemed simultaneously random and terrifyingly strategic. Fear seeped into every corner of the galaxy, a slow poison that spread faster than any infection. Corporal Jim Avery, crouched behind a scorched transport vehicle, muttered under his breath, How are they doing this?" His voice was hoarse, disbelief threading every syllable. Keaton shook her head, eyes never leaving the ridge. "They're not just fighting," she said, her tone tight with grim resolve. "They're teaching a lesson. And the lesson is, never underestimate a Deathworlder." Marcus's thoughts turned to the civilians of New Aurelia 4, the ones who had not evacuated in time, whose lives had been snatched in the first hours of this onslaught. He had fought to protect people before, but never on this scale. Never against a force that seemed to move beyond fear, beyond self-preservation, beyond the rules that governed every other species he had known. He gave a silent prayer to no god in particular and pressed forward, signaling his team to converge on a ruined transport depot. Inside, they would make a stand, not to win, but to survive. As they moved, they passed streets littered with bodies, charred and broken, eyes staring blankly at the sky. Entire families had been swept away in moments, their deaths sufficient, impersonal, yet horrifying in their inevitability. "Marcus," Keaton whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "We've got incoming. Heavy weapons." Marcus pivoted just in time to see a trio of human squads crest the ridge. They moved like hunters, fluid and synchronized, each soldier covering the other, weapons blazing with precision. The first salvo struck the depot, shattering the wall with a shockwave that sent Marcus sprawling across the scorched ground. Dust choked his lungs, but he forced himself up. Retreat was impossible, they were surrounded, funneled into a kill zone by the very terrain they had hoped to use for cover. Every shot Marcus fired was met with counterfire, yet he noticed something uncanny: the humans didn't just react, they predicted. A twist of the body, a sidestep, a quick burst from their rifles, it was as if they knew where he would be before he even thought to move. His mind raced. Training, instinct, experience, none of it mattered here. And then, as night began to settle over the shattered landscape, Marcus saw the unmistakable glimmer of their intent, not conquest, not plunder, but message. Each strike, each fallen comrade, each demolished building, each terrified survivor was part of a communication he could read without words. Humans had stopped playing nice. They had decided, collectively and irrevocably, to reshape the galaxy by fear, by force, by sheer unwillingness to be underestimated. Hours later, as the first stars pierced the smoke-choked sky, Marcus and the remnants of his unit huddled in the wreckage of what had been a communications tower. His hands shook as he reloaded his rifle, his ears still ringing from the artillery, his eyes still haunted by the sight of human fire cutting through his world. We survived," Corporal Avery muttered, disbelief laced with bitter relief. Marcus shook his head, staring into the darkness. "Survived doesn't mean safe," he said quietly. "They're still out there. And if the stories are true, this is only the beginning." Keaton, sitting beside him with her armor scorched and dented, gave a slow nod. "Every species in the galaxy will remember today," she said, almost to herself. "The day the Deathworlders decided to stop playing nice. And every species will tell stories about it, about the fire they brought, the fear they spread, and the unstoppable force we faced firsthand." Marcus looked out over the desolation, the remnants of New Aurelia 4 stretching to the horizon like a graveyard of civilization. Somewhere beyond the smoke and shadows, the humans moved onward, unstoppable and unyielding. And he understood, with a cold certainty, that this war wasn't about territory or politics, it was about survival, about legacy, about teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The night deepened, and the wind carried the stench of metal, blood, and ozone, a warning echoing across the stars. Somewhere in that darkness, the Deathworlders prepared for the next strike. And every being that remained alive on New Aurelia 4 knew, in the marrow of their bones, that the world as they had known it was over. Because humans had decided to stop playing nice. The Council of Systems convened in a chamber that seemed too calm for the storm raging across the galaxy. Towering crystalline walls reflected the harsh white light of Vera suns, throwing fractured reflections across the assembly floor. Ambassador Rildu of the Trelkay shifted uneasily on her multi-jointed legs, her antennae twitching in constant nervous motion. Every council member had heard the reports, but hearing and seeing were not the same. No projection, no communication relay could capture the terror that humans, the Deathworlders, had wrought. "They've moved faster than any of us predicted," Rilda said, her voice quivering. "Entire fleets, gone. Entire sectors, eradicated. How do we fight a species that seems to anticipate every move we make?" Colonel Nathaniel Royce, human liaison and veteran of countless border skirmishes, stood rigidly at the back. His dark brown eyes swept across the room, noting every subtle twitch of the alien delegates. He understood their panic. He had seen it firsthand. "You don't fight them like you fight another species," he said evenly, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "You survive them. And surviving them requires understanding what makes them unstoppable." A low murmur rippled across the council chamber. Rilda's compound eyes narrowed. "And what is that, Colonel?" "Desperation. Fear. Rage," Royce said. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "The galaxy has treated humans as expendable, unpredictable, chaotic. But we've learned, hard way, that underestimate a Deathworlder at your own peril. They transform adversity into strategy, weakness into weapon. They don't play nice because they've never had to until now." Outside the chamber, a fleet of human warships tore through the outer sectors with surgical precision. Royce's personal comlink buzzed constantly, delivering fragmented updates. Entire communication arrays had been neutralized, and even heavily fortified planets were falling under relentless, coordinated assaults. It wasn't just a war, it was a message. The humans had declared themselves the reckoning the galaxy could no longer ignore. Lieutenant Sarah Keaton hovered in orbit aboard the Harrow's Edge, a reconnaissance cruiser attached to a coalition fleet. She stared at the tactical hologram before her, mapping the movement of human forces with a growing sense of awe and fear. It's like watching an apex predator, she murmured, fingers tracing the arcs of incoming ships across the projection. But one that knows every weakness of its prey. Corporal Jim Avery, leaning against the observation railing, shivered. Do you think they'll stop? His voice carried the weight of someone who had already lost friends to the human onslaught. Keaton shook her head. No. Not until the galaxy remembers the day Deathworlders stopped playing nice. And some lessons are learned too late. Across the void, Marcus Harlow and his unit navigated the wreckage-strewn surface of Erethos, a barren world acting as a temporary refuge for retreating forces. They had lost half their number on New Aurelia 4, yet Marcus refused to surrender to despair. He could still feel the human presence in every distant flash of light across the sky, every subtle shift in the void. We survived tonight, he told his weary soldiers, voice low but firm. Tomorrow, we fight again. And if we have to, we'll remind them humans are dangerous, but not invincible. The coalition had tried conventional strategies, overwhelming numbers, advanced targeting systems, and coordinated planetary defenses. Every tactic failed. Human forces adapted instantaneously, exploiting gaps in formation and turning hesitation into catastrophic loss. No matter the plan, they seemed 3 steps ahead, moving with uncanny coordination as if every fleet, every strike team, every solitary operative shared a single consciousness. Keaton observed one engagement unfold in real time. From orbit, she watched a human strike team deploy across a desert moon, hitting a heavily fortified orbital cannon array. The defenders, crack infantry and Giovanni engineers, opened fire, but the humans moved with preternatural fluidity. Rounds were dodged, barricades breached, and the installation fell in minutes. The casualty reports that followed were staggering, the scale of destruction almost incomprehensible. They're not just attacking, Keaton muttered. They're erasing fear. They're erasing doubt. And every world they touch will never forget it. Avery exhaled sharply. And yet, somehow, they survive every counter. That's because they're not just surviving, Keaton said. Her gaze hardened. They're sending a message. And it's not one you can ignore. In orbit, the Coalition fleet adjusted course to intercept the humans before they reached the industrial planet of Orvana Prime. The Council had demanded retaliation, a decisive strike to slow the human advance. But Marcus understood the reality of the situation better than anyone in the chamber below. We can't stop them entirely, he admitted during the strategy briefing. But we can slow them, disrupt them, force them to take losses that might teach us something. And if we fail, at least we leave survivors to tell the story about what it's like to face a Deathworlder when they've stopped playing nice. Meanwhile, human forces pressed forward like a storm across the sector. Supply lines, defensive fleets, and even civilian evacuation corridors became tactical chess pieces. Entire planetary defenses collapsed before the Deathworlders' relentless assault. They were precise, brutal, and terrifyingly adaptable. Every victory reinforced the legend of their wrath, sending shockwaves of fear and awe across the Coalition. Hours turned into days. Coalition forces were forced to abandon Orvana Prime, and Marcus's unit was redeployed to Harrow's Pass, a narrow asteroid belt offering a potential choke point. Keaton and Avery joined them via shuttle, faces pale from days of tension and constant vigilance. Every time we think we've figured them out, Marcus said as they huddled in the wreckage of an abandoned asteroid mining station, they changed the rules. And they've been playing by no rules for a long time. Keaton's voice was soft, almost reverent. They're something else. A force we can't hope to match conventionally. They're teaching the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the Deathworlders. Marcus's eyes, shadowed by exhaustion and determination, scanned the black void of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there, human vessels moved in formations too complex to predict, striking where no one expected, killing with precision that bordered on instinct. They weren't monsters, at least not in the sense his people understood, but they were beyond reckoning. They were a living, breathing example of survival honed into weaponized perfection. Tonight, Marcus said quietly, we survive. Tomorrow, we fight again. And one day, maybe, we'll understand why they became the force they are. But tonight, all we can do is survive. Keaton nodded, gripping her rifle as a distant pulse of light swept across the void. Avery leaned against the bulkhead, whispering a prayer to gods he wasn't sure existed. In that silence, they all felt it, the pervasive certainty that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans were coming, and they were coming with a message. Every species would remember the day Deathworlders decided to stop playing nice. It wasn't just a war, it was a reckoning, a demonstration of the consequences of underestimating a species forged in adversity, resilience, and relentless resolve. And the galaxy, shaken to its core, would tell stories for generations of the fire and fury unleashed by a species no one thought could ever be so dangerous, until it already was. Marcus stared out at the endless stars, each pinprick of light a world potentially lost. He understood the harsh truth: survival wasn't about winning, and it wasn't about courage alone. It was about learning, adapting, and remembering what it meant to face a force that refused to be ignored. The Deathworlders were more than a legend now, they were a reckoning, and the galaxy would never forget it. The stars above Vesper 9 glimmered coldly, indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. The planet's surface, a labyrinth of jagged canyons and molten rivers, offered few advantages for defense, yet it was here that Marcus Harlow's unit made their stand. Survivors from New Aurelia 4, Erethos, and scattered sectors had formed a fragile coalition of humans and alien allies, soldiers united less by loyalty than by shared fear and desperate hope. Marcus crouched behind a craggy ridge, scanning the horizon. Lieutenant Sarah Keaton was beside him, adjusting the aim of a long-range plasma rifle. Corporal Jim Avery checked the ammunition, hands trembling slightly, but his eyes were sharp, vigilant. They all understood what this moment represented: the humans were coming, and they would not be merciful. "They're moving fast," Keaton murmured, her gaze tracking the faint glint of metal on the far ridge. "Faster than anyone predicted." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Good. Let them. They'll find we're not just sitting ducks. We might not win, but we'll make them pay for every inch." The coalition had spent days preparing. Explosive traps lined the narrow passes, automated turrets concealed beneath rubble, energy nets ready to ensnare any descending forces. Yet even as they set their ambush, Marcus felt the familiar weight of dread settle in his chest. Humans didn't fight conventionally. They didn't follow predictable patterns. Every moment could shift from hope to annihilation. The first wave hit with the sudden violence of a solar flare. Dropships pierced the smoky sky, engines roaring as they descended toward the canyons. Human squads disembarked, weapons already firing, moving with a fluid, uncanny coordination that immediately turned the ambush into a deadly dance. Explosions erupted across the ridges, throwing clouds of dust and molten rock into the air. Marcus yelled orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold positions. Wait for the signal." The humans didn't hesitate. Their tactics were both precise and terrifyingly instinctive. Turrets melted under concentrated plasma bursts. Mines detonated, leaving human squads unscathed, already flanking their attackers with impossible speed. It was as if they could anticipate every defensive measure before it even existed. Amid the storm, Marcus's eyes met Keaton's. No words were exchanged, they didn't need them. Together, they adjusted their strategy on the fly, guiding retreating units to safer positions, luring human squads into zones prepped with explosives. Still, every calculated move was met with countermaneuvers that pushed them further back, toward the jagged cliffs overlooking the molten rivers. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last, every second soaked in heat, smoke, and adrenaline. Soldiers fell, screams echoing through the canyons, swallowed almost immediately by the roar of human weaponry. Marcus fought through exhaustion, reloading, calling coordinates, and striking only when he could guarantee a delay in the humans' advance. Somewhere within the maelstrom, Marcus realized something that chilled him deeper than any weapon could: the humans weren't fighting for conquest, for territory, or even for revenge. They were fighting to assert a truth the galaxy had long ignored: that the underestimated, the dismissed, the labeled Deathworlders could not and would not be contained. Every death, every destruction, every flash of fire was both a warning and a declaration. A sudden flash illuminated the canyon walls. A squad of human soldiers had breached a key defensive ridge. Plasma rounds cut through the automated turrets, and Marcus's team was forced to retreat, scrambling over jagged rocks to avoid annihilation. Avery's face was pale, but he kept moving, firing blindly at shadows, at reflections, at anything resembling the humans' deadly advance. "They never stop," Avery muttered, voice trembling. They don't stop." Keaton's jaw tightened. "They only stop when everyone knows what happens when a Deathworlder decides enough is enough." Marcus gritted his teeth and signaled the next phase. They would fall back to the heart of the canyon, a narrow choke point they had prepared for maximum effect. If they could hold that line, even briefly, they might slow the human advance enough to save the civilian colonies further down the valley. The humans arrived with near-perfect timing. Marcus's team triggered the first wave of traps. Explosions erupted, throwing human squads off balance for a precious few seconds. But even as the fires flared, humans adapted. They rolled through flames, flipped over rubble, and returned fire with terrifying precision. Every tactic Marcus had relied upon, every plan, every ambush, was rendered partially ineffective by the humans' sheer adaptability. Minutes blurred into a relentless cadence of attack and counterattack. Marcus felt his body burning with fatigue, every nerve screaming in tension, but his mind remained clear. Every loss, every misstep, every failure was a lesson, a glimpse into the force they faced. Finally, the battle reached its crescendo atop the central cliffs. Marcus and his team, battered and bloodied, watched as human forces paused, seemingly for no reason other than to mark their victory. Marcus realized, with reluctant clarity, that the humans were not monsters, they were mirrors of the galaxy's arrogance. They had been underestimated, dismissed, and treated as expendable. Now, they returned every slight, every miscalculation, with the unflinching efficiency of those who had learned to survive where no one else could. Keaton whispered, almost to herself, This is why they're unstoppable. They've been forged in fire and survival. Every galaxy has counted them out, every galaxy has misjudged them, and we're paying the price." Marcus nodded. "We can't stop them entirely. But we can survive. And survival is enough to remind the galaxy that even legends have limits." As night fell, the canyons quieted. Fires smoldered, smoke drifted lazily across the shattered ridges, and human forces vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving destruction in their wake. Marcus's unit, battered but alive, took stock of their losses. Entire companies had been decimated, friends and comrades lying in silence across the molten rock. Yet there was a glimmer of hope. They had survived the storm, and in doing so, had learned more about the humans than any report or projection could convey. Somewhere in the darkness, across the endless void of space, the human fleets moved onward. Each strike, each raid, each calculated destruction carried the same message: underestimate a Deathworlder at your own peril. Marcus gazed at the horizon, listening to the dying echoes of battle. Somewhere, the stories had already begun. Across sectors, species whispered in fear and awe, sharing tales of the human fury that had descended on their worlds, tales that would be passed down for generations. The galaxy had witnessed the reckoning. It had witnessed the unstoppable, relentless force of a species forged by adversity and tempered in survival. And although the humans would not stop, although the devastation would continue, a lesson lingered in the minds of those who survived: courage, unity, and adaptability could endure even in the face of an unstoppable storm. Marcus turned to Keaton and Avery, their faces shadowed by exhaustion and resolve. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "But we survived. And sometimes, that's enough to change the story." Keaton nodded, eyes scanning the smoke-streaked horizon. "Every species will remember this day," she whispered. "The day the Deathworlders decided to stop playing nice. And the galaxy will never be the same." Marcus looked up at the stars. Somewhere, distant systems were burning. Somewhere, humans were advancing. Somewhere, the legend of the Deathworlders was being written in fire, in blood, and in the trembling memory of the galaxy itself. The night was silent now, heavy with loss, heavy with understanding, heavy with the undeniable truth: humans were more than a threat. They were a reckoning. And the universe would never forget the day they chose to stop playing nice.